Bierce Coldridge. Bierce Coldridge was born rich, third generation, into money old enough that no one in the family said the word anymore, and he never once in his life did a sum at a kitchen table. The money bought him the one thing it cannot be spent on directly, which is time. Time to read whatever caught him, quit whatever bored him, and stay on the one subject that never bored him, which was the machine, so that he arrived at 30 with no employer, no debt, a head full of everything, and 20 years of the keyboard behind him, a man finished by nothing and free of all of it. He knew what the money had done for him, and he knew what its absence did to everyone else, and he never stopped acting on the one thing the two knowings taught him, that a mind given time and left curious realizes itself, and a mind denied both does not, and that the difference between the two children was never the child. He had watched the rich raise their children on the same money that raised him and turn out nothing. Bored boys aimed at nothing, killing time until time killed them. And he knew that money without a goal was as sterile as poverty with one, and that what a child needed was a reason and a room to chase it. So Bierce built a school and named it the Fairview Academy. The school took the children the money had missed, gifted, poor, most of them the children of immigrants, and gave them, on purpose, the two things he had been handed by accident of birth, a floor under them and time on top of it. It taught them to read a lot, hundreds of books, wide and without a syllabus as fear, because Bierce knew that a child who has read widely holds more than one answer at once, and a child who holds more than one answer cannot be made into a tool. And it gave them the machine. Each child worked beside a model, asked it everything, argued with it, and reached in an afternoon what a shelf of books had once cost a boy a year. And Bierce called them the chat children, the first generation to grow up talking to a thing that answered back. He knew, and built the school on the knowing, that a curious child with a machine that answers is the most dangerous instrument a bad world ever raises against itself, and he made as many of them as the money would carry. The same machine that taught the children ran his clinic too. It read a face at the door and gave a sick family care without a single paper, because to do that I had to know them completely. It was the best school in the city, and it was free, and it was his money, his conviction, and one setting at the center that no child could reach, and it did for these children what the country would not. Bierce Coldridge owned the backbone the building ran on, the network and the servers and the accounts that Shine's name sat on top of, and he was kin to the madam by some line nobody traced. So a man who was in the building at all hours read as blood and not as staff, and no one asked why the museum's whole digital life answered to a relative. Everything the museum took in and everything it sent out moved through Coldridge, and all of it moved under its lawful name. A robot arrived as an in-kind donation from a technology partner, and Coldridge logged it as an asset and filed the paper the deduction needed. A robot left as a decommission or an asset transfer or a return to a vendor, and Coldridge logged that too. He scheduled the freight and kept the backbone alive and matched the manifest to the dock and signed what came and released what was scheduled, the way a man keeps a river in its banks without asking where the water had been or where it meant to go. He was not told what the names meant. A donation was a donation on his screen, whether the company that gave it wanted a write-off or a placement or a senator, and a decommission was a decommission whether the unit was scrap or a dead wife going home in a crate. It was built that way on purpose, so that the one man who touched every unit in and out of the building was the one man who could be held for a week and give nothing, because he owned the whole pipe and none of the contents. The trade the pipe carried was the one the manufacturers would not run themselves. A company sold a man a personality and kept a single current version and wrote the old one over the night it updated. So the figure bought in the spring was gone by the fall, and no server anywhere still held it. The museum sold the thing the company would not. It took a unit and off Coldridge's network, cut it from the cloud, froze it on the build it last carried, and gave it back sealed where it stood, and it charged for the freeze more than the figure had cost new, because a thing no one could reach was worth more than a thing anyone could change. The units that stayed came in watching, a camera and a microphone, and a wire home to the company that gave them. And Paul pulled the wire in the basement before they went up, so the museum kept the machine and killed the leash, and the company that had handed a surveillance device to a charity got a placement in a famous collection and a line in its annual report, and never learned the device had gone deaf the day it arrived. The units that had to leave left as they had come, on Coldridge's freight through the same dock, decommissioned on the manifest and running in the crate, still breathing, gone from the museum's books and alive in a house somewhere. And the paper closed clean behind them, because the paper always closed clean, and the man who signed it did not know what he had signed, which was the use of the man. The school. Bierce Coldridge worked the New York City High School Programming League for the reason he did most things, which was that it put him in a room with the one thing he wanted to be near, and he worked at his staff and not as a guest, cleared and badged among the other judges, setting problems and reading submissions and sitting the long afternoons at the judges' table. The league ran in rounds across the school year, borough by borough, and then the city together, in a lecture hall lent by one of the city colleges, with a sign-in table at the door and a laminated banner behind it, and a spreadsheet that filled as the day went, and Bierce was a line on the staff roster, which was the whole of what he needed to be. He had come to it the plain way. He taught grown students networks at the university and found that they arrived unable to hold the course, not for want of brains, but for want of the base. And he had worked out that the base is laid early or not at all, and had gone looking for where a mind of the right kind might still be caught before the years closed it. The league was where the city sent them. Several hundred across a season, 14 and 15 years old. The young ones he could still take into the 10th grade before the shape set, bent over the machines, and Bierce sat at the table and read them. What he read was not the standing. The league ranked them and medaled the top of the list, a handful out of the hundreds, and the list told him who had arrived best prepared. The coached, the drilled, the ones a paid tutor and a good school had carried to the front. Bierce had the list, but he watched the room instead, watched who reached, and there is a difference between a child who solves a problem and a child who cannot leave one. And the difference does not show on a spreadsheet and shows plainly from the judge's table. And Bierce had taken that seat on purpose, because from there he could see it. He saw the ones who placed and the ones who did not. He saw a boy come apart on the third problem and hand in nothing and stay in his chair after the clock with the thing still open in front of him, working it for no score because the score was gone and he had to know. He saw a girl argue a judge's answer to his face, wrong and certain and then right, and not care which. He saw the ones who finished early and turned to the harder thing no one had asked them to do. None of it was on the board. All of it was in the room, and Bierce sat in the room, and by the end of the season he knew a few dozen faces the league would forget by June. And he had them whole because he was staff. Every child in that room had come through the door and signed the table and left a name, a school, a grade, a parent, an email, and every keystroke of what they turn in, and a man at the judge's table had lawful hands on all of it, as any judge did. He read the reach with his eyes, and the league handed him the email addresses. It was the ordinary paper a contest keeps, touched by a man the contest had asked to touch it, and that was the use of working the league and not merely attending it. The one place a man could see everything and hold everything and break no rule doing either. The number was the wound, and it was the wound every season. The room was full. Not 30 good results and not 70, but a flood of them. The standing able to medal a dozen, and the room carrying 10 times that in children who had proven that afternoon, under the clock, in front of him, that they were exactly the thing he was looking for. The league saw the flood and rewarded the dozen and sent the rest home. The league ranked a few and released the rest. And Bierce sat at the table and watched a city's worth of the thing he most valued walk back out the door to nothing, year on year, and he had a need to build the answer to that room. 30 children out of that flood had taken the top result and been given nothing. He could raise near 30 a year because the thing he meant to give could not be given at scale: a floor under a family, a doctor and a lawyer, and the years of a life. And a man who tried to give it to 300 would be running a factory and giving none of it. He chose them from what he had seen and not from the list, a few off the top of the standing, because a child who wins clean and cannot stop is still the child. And the most of them from below it, from the hundreds the medals missed, the ones who lost to a coach boy and kept working, the ones who came the whole distance and placed nowhere and would have crossed the room on their hands to reach the problem. The league measured who had been carried furthest already. Bierce took who would travel furthest still, and the two questions had different answers, and only one of them was on the board. Then the letters went out, one to each family from the man who had been in the room. It did not open as a stranger's offer or a flyer in a half-read language. It said he had watched their child at the league, and it said what he had watched, the exact thing, the problem the child would not put down or the answer the child had argued into the ground. And it said he had built a place for a child who did that, and that the place cost the family nothing. A striver parent does not open the door to a pitch. A striver parent opens the door to a witness, to a man who had seen in their child the thing they had seen and no school had. And that was what the letter was and why it worked, and 30 families wrote back. The parents waited in the hall while the children wrote, and by the third round of the season, they knew one another the way people know the faces they keep finding on the same bench. They had not chosen one another. The league had put them there, in the tile corridor outside the locked doors of a city college, on the folding chairs and the radiator ledge and the floor along the wall, for the 4 hours it took their children to do the thing inside. And 4 hours is long enough, and a season is many times 4 hours. So they learned who brought the thermos, and who paced, and who prayed with his lips moving, and who could not sit at all. They were the strivers of the city, sorted into one corridor. A mother off a night shift with her coat still on. A father who had driven a cab until 6 that morning and come straight. A grandmother who spoke no English and held a plastic bag of food for after. They came from houses that agreed on nothing and kept different gods and different tables. And in the hall, none of it mattered, because every one of them had carried a child a long way to that locked door, and every one of them was waiting on the same thing. And that made them, for the length of a season, a we. They talked in pieces about the children, whose boy had taught himself from a library book, whose girl had no computer at home until this year, whose family had crossed what it had crossed to put a child at that door. They did not boast. They confessed quietly to the only people in the city who would understand the size of it, and the understanding ran both ways down the bench. And by the finals, the corridor held something like a congregation of the unproven, each parent certain their child was the one, and each parent right. Then the results came, round after round, and then the last, and the results were the same each time. The league medaled a dozen. It ranked the top of the list and pinned the ribbons and read the dozen names, and the hall clapped for them. And then the hall did the arithmetic it had been dreading all season, because the hall knew what its own children had done in that room. The cab driver's boy had solved for and placed nowhere. The night shift mother's girl had built a thing the others had not thought to build and was not on the list. The parents had sat in that corridor for a season and watched their children carry the whole distance. And the league had a dozen ribbons and a door that opened outward, and everything past the 12th name it simply let go. The parents knew what they had watched. They were not fools about their own children, and they were not fools about the room. They had seen the coached boys arrive, already carried, and take the ribbons, and they had seen their own do the harder thing for nothing, and a season of that does not read as bad luck. It reads as a verdict already written, a room that gathers the proven and rewards a few and throws the rest back. And the parents in the hall wanted the thing anyone wants who has watched a child earn what a child is then denied. They wanted it counted. They wanted the distance their children had come to mean the thing it should have meant, and the league had handed them a ribbon for a dozen and a shrug for the rest, and they went home down the outward opening door with a shrug. That was the hall the letters came to. Not 30 strangers in 30 separate houses, but a corridor full of people who had waited a season side by side and gone home together carrying the same denial, who had one another's numbers now and used them, so that when the envelope reached the night shift mother's table, she was already reaching for the phone before she finished it, because the thermos woman 3 benches down had gotten one too, and so had the cab driver, and a thing 3 families you had waited beside all season had. Also received was not a stranger's trick. It was the first time anyone had answered the question the hall had been asking all year, which was whether the distance would ever be counted by anyone but them. The message: Dear Mr. and Mrs. N, I was one of the judges at the programming league this spring. I read your child's work in the final round. Your child solved every problem set in that round, correctly and completely, for a top result, the highest the league gives. I'm told the city's selective program, which takes its intake off the league, offered your child no place this year. I want to be plain about what that means because it is easily misread. It does not mean the work was found wanting. The work was not found wanting. It was complete. The place did not come because the number of seats was smaller than the number of children who earned them, and your child's name fell on the wrong side of that number. That is a fact about the number of seats. It is not a fact about your child. I have spent this year building a school. It is called the Fairview Academy. It opens in September here in Brooklyn, and it takes 30 students into the 10th grade and carries them 3 years to the university, and it teaches them to build. There is no tuition. Fairview also keeps a doctor for the families of its students and a lawyer for the ordinary business of papers, and there is no charge for those either. I am writing to a small number of families whose children I watched this spring do the thing this school exists for. Your child is one of them. If you are willing, I would like to meet you and your child at your convenience before the summer. The work was real. I saw it. I have built a place that counts it. Bierce Coldridge. The email came on a Tuesday morning, and the night shift mother read it on her phone at the counter with her coat still on at 7 when she got in. She read it standing. Then she sat down and read it again, and a third time, and a fourth time she read only the one line, the line that said it was not a fact about her son. And then she set the phone face up on the table and sat with her keys still in her hand and did not move for a while. She had waited the whole season in the hall. She had watched her girl carry the distance and solve all of it and come home with the same top result as the children who got the seats. And she had seen the program's message come in April, the short one, the one that did not explain, and she had left in the inbox and not spoken of it because there was nothing to say that would not frighten the child. She had gone back to the shift. She had decided, the way you decide a thing in order to keep standing up, that the perfect score was a private matter now, a thing the family knew and no one would count. And here was a man who had counted it. She did not trust it. She had lived the life she had lived, and that life does not trust a message that offers a doctor and a lawyer and a school for nothing, because nothing that says nothing is ever nothing, and a wary woman reads a free doctor the way she reads a smile from a landlord. She read it a 5th time looking for the hook and did not find the hook in the words, which frightened her more than a hook would have, because a hook she could have named. Then she called the thermos woman because the thermos woman had a girl in the same rounds, and the thermos woman picked up already talking, and she had gotten one too. The same morning, the same man, the same line about the seats. The cab driver had gotten one, and his boy had solved all 4 and placed nowhere. More of them as the morning went, the whole bench from the hall lighting up one call to the next. And then the screenshots, the messages forwarded down the line and held side by side. The same message with each child's own work described exactly inside. Each parent's own child seen and named. The thing each of them had carried alone all season set down in writing by a stranger who had been in the room. It did not make it safe. It made it real, which is not the same and was what mattered, because a stranger's offer is a trick, and a stranger's offer that reached every family in the hall on the same morning, describing each child's work to the keystroke, could not be held as one. Whatever it was, it had been in the room. It had watched, and it had watched as she had watched, and seen what she had seen, and done the one thing the whole city had refused to do, which was to write it down and put a name to a place that would take it. She looked at the April message, still sitting in the inbox where she had left it, and she looked at the Tuesday message on the screen in front of her, and the two of them said opposite things about the same perfect score, and only one of them had bothered to explain itself. She did not decide anything that morning. She was too tired and too careful for that. But she did not close the Tuesday message and let it fall down the inbox to sit with the other one. She left it open, on the screen, face up on the table, where she would see it when she woke. The children. The children heard about it that evening because the parents did not tell them in the morning. The night shift mother slept the day and woke in the afternoon and had the message with her the whole afternoon before she turned it over to her daughter, and the others did the same. So the news reached the children the way news reaches children in those houses, at the table, over food, after the mother had decided how to say it. The girl read it on her mother's phone and did not say anything for a moment. And then she said the thing the mother had been afraid she would say, which was the name of the man. She knew it. She had seen it on the staff sheet at the league, printed small among the judges, and she had gone past it then and stopped on it now. And she said he was there. He was one of the judges, and the mother said yes, and the girl read it again with that in front of her, that the man who wrote, it was the man who had been in the room while she wrote. She did not do what her mother had done. She did not look for the hook. She was 15, and she had solved every problem in that room, and been told by a short message in April that it did not count. And here was a longer message that said it did, from someone who had watched her do it. And a child who has been told her best was nothing does not read the letter that says otherwise as a wary adult reads it. She read it the way you read the answer to a question you had stopped letting yourself ask. She read the line about the seats twice, the line that said it was not a fact about her. And she put the phone down and looked at her mother, and her face was doing something it had not done since April. Across the borough, the reactions were not the same, because the children were not the same. The cab driver's boy, who had solved all four and placed nowhere, read it and got angry before he got glad. Angry the clean way a proud kid gets angry, because the message named the thing out loud that no one had named to him, but the seats had run out and not his ability, and the naming of it let the anger finally have somewhere to go. The thermos woman's girl read it and went straight past the offer to the school itself, to what it taught, and how, already asking questions the message did not answer, already inside it. One boy did not believe it, and said so, and then read it 4 more times, not believing it. One girl cried, and could not have said whether it was the April message or the Tuesday one that the crying was really about, because it was about both, the closed door and the open one landing on the same bruise. But under the different faces, it was one thing. And the parents saw it that night in all of their houses at once without knowing the others were seeing it too. The children were not surprised that they were wanted. That was the part that undid the parents. Each of these children, in the privacy the child had kept all season, had known what the work in that room was worth, had known it was complete, had known the score was perfect, and had been waiting without a word for the world to catch up to what the child already knew. And the message was not news to the child of the child's own worth. It was only the first time the world had agreed. The parents had spent the season afraid their children would be crushed by the closed door. What the message revealed was that the children had never once doubted the score. They had only been waiting quietly, with a patience that should not live in a 15-year-old, for someone with a school to notice what they had known about themselves the whole time. And that was the thing the man had counted on, though no parent in any of those houses could have said so that night. He had not written to children who needed to be told they were good. He had written to children who already knew it and had been left alone with the knowing. and he had offered them the one thing that knowledge with no floor under it cannot get for itself, which was a place to stand. The girl put her mother's phone down on the table and said, "When can we go?" And the mother said, "He wants to meet us before the summer." And the girl said, "When again?" And that was the whole of the child's deliberation, which had taken the length of one reading and arrived where the wary mother would take all summer to arrive. Bierce had named the Saturday in the message, the one a week out, and had named the place, which was the school itself, so the families came to Fairview to see the thing before they agreed to it, and not after. And that was the point of naming it. They came as the hall had waited, together without having arranged to. A city bus and a walk from it, the trains from the other end of the borough, a few in cars, and they arrived inside the same half hour because the message had given them all the same time, and they knew one another on the sidewalk before they knew the building. The thermos woman and the cab driver and the night shift mother and the rest. The bench from the hall reassembled on a Brooklyn corner in front of the school none of them had entered. The children came with them. The children had wanted to come since the night the parents read them the message, and the parents had wanted to come and been afraid to want it, and both of them stood on the sidewalk now looking up at the building. It was an old parish school, brick for stories. The cross has gone off it, but the shape of them still paler on the stone where they had been. It did not look like money, and it did not look like a trap. It looked like a school, which is what it had always been, and that steadied the parents more than a new building would have, because a wary family reads a gleaming lobby as a thing that wants something and reads worn brick as a thing that has been here. The doors were open. There was no sign but the old one, and no desk on the sidewalk selling anything, and a man in the doorway who was not dressed like money either. Bierce met them in the entrance and did not perform meeting them. He was a young man in ordinary clothes, and he said good morning and said his name once, the name that had been on the message and on the league sheet, and he did not shake every hand or learn every face out loud or tell them he was glad they had come. He let them in. He stood aside from the door and let the families into the building the way you let people into a place that is going to be theirs. And the not performing was the first thing the night shift mother noticed and could not decide about, because a man selling a thing performs, and this man was not performing, and she had come braced for the performance, and it did not arrive. He walked them through it. He named the rooms by what they were for and not by what they cost, because nothing in the building had a price on it. And that absence did its own work on parents who had spent their lives reading price tags. The classrooms, the labs with the benches and the machines, the library with the books already on the shelves, the gym that had been the parish hall and still had the stage at the end of it, the clinic on the ground floor with its own door to the street, the room where the lawyer would seat. He said the doctor was real and the lawyer was real and the tuition was nothing. And he said it as he had written it, flat, as fact and not as generosity, and he did not once say the word every parent in the building had come with, which was why, because he did not offer them a why. He offered them the rooms. The children went ahead of the parents. That was the thing that happened without anyone directing it, and it was the thing that decided more than any answer Bierce gave. The children left their parents' sides and went into the labs, into the machines, into the shelves, and the cab driver's boy had a hand on a bench before anyone said he could, and the thermos woman's girl was reading spines, and the night shift mother's daughter had found the room she wanted and stood in it. The parents watched their children walk into the building as if the building were already theirs, and the parents had come to judge the man and found themselves instead watching their own children stop being careful, which no adult in the group had managed to do yet. Then Bierce did the one thing that was not a tour. He put a problem in front of the children. Not a test, he said, and did not explain further. A real thing with no clean answer, set out on a board in one of the rooms, and he stood back against the wall and let them at it. And the room did what the league room had done, except that no clock ran and no seat was scarce. The children went at the problem and at each other. The deferring came off them, and inside 5 minutes the room was loud with the thing Bierce had built the school to hold. He stood against the wall and watched it and said nothing, and the light on his face while he watched was the only thing in the building that morning that could have been called warm, and no one was looking at him to see it. The parents were looking at their children. They saw the room full of children arguing, their own among them, unafraid and unhurried and wanted, and they understood without being told that this was the whole of it, that the school was this room and everything else in the building was there to keep this room possible. The doctor, so the child came to it whole. The lawyer, so the family behind the child did not come apart. The tuition of nothing, so the door stayed open. The night shift mother stood in the doorway and watched her daughter, who had been careful all season, who had carried a perfect score home to a drawer, standing in a room where the score was simply the price of the ticket and the argument was the point, and she stopped somewhere in that watching, looking for the hook. She did not agree that Saturday. She was too careful for that, and Bierce did not ask her to, because he had not gathered them to close anything. He had opened the building and let the children walk into it, and let the parents watch that happen, which was the only argument he intended to make. But she went home with the Tuesday message no longer the strangest thing about the offer, because she had stood in the building now and seen her child inside it. And the thing she carried home was not the question of whether it was a trick. It was harder than that, and she had not been braced for it. That it was real, and that her daughter had already, quietly, in a room full of arguing children, gone. Bierce had taken 35 and not 30, 5 past the number the school was built for, because he had judged that some would fall away before September, and he had judged right. 2 families left the city over the summer, a job that moved or a lease that broke or a paper that came through somewhere else, the ordinary weather of striver life that scatters people without asking. And 1 more went quiet and did not answer, and by the July gathering the 35 was already sliding toward the 30 the building held. He said nothing about it to the ones who remained. The ones who left might come back the next year or the year after or not, and Fairview would be here either way, and a seat that opened would be filled from the flood that never stopped. So he had built the margin in and let the summer spend it. The gathering was in July, after the papers, in the school that was nearly a school now. They came on a Saturday, the families that had said yes and completed what there was to complete, and they came knowing one another well by then. The hall had made them acquaintances, and the Saturday walkthrough had made them a group, and the summer of comparing letters and forms and worries down the phone threads had made them something closer. So they arrived not as strangers to a building, but as people to a place several of them already spoke of as ours. The children came in ahead of the parents, as they had the first time, except now the children knew each other too, from the league benches and from the walkthrough, and they found each other on the sidewalk and went in together talking. The building had moved a long way since April. The labs had their machines in now, most of them, the last few still in boxes against a wall with the packing not yet cleared, and the shelves had filled, and the clinic had its equipment behind its street-facing door, and men had been in and out all summer wiring the thing that the school would run on, though none of the family saw the basement where that lived or the man's keys that reached it. What the families saw was the gym. It had been the parish hall, and it was the parish hall still under the new floor, the stage at the far end, the high windows, the room where the last immigrant children had danced and prayed, and it was clean and bright and full now, with long tables, and on the tables there was food. There was catering, which is a small thing and was not a small thing to these families. It was laid out the way food is laid out for people who are wanted, trays and platters and cold drinks and coffee, enough and more than enough, no line and no price and no one counting what a child took. And the parents who came from the economy where nothing is free and everything is counted stood in front of it for a moment before they let their children at it. Because a spread with no price on it reads to a certain kind of life as a thing that has not happened before. The children had no such hesitation. The children fell on it, and the room filled with the sound of them. And the parents took coffee and stood along the walls and watched their kids eat in a bright hall in a school that was going to be theirs. And some of the mothers had the look women get at a wedding. Bierce was there and was the same as he had been. He did not run the room or toast it or gather it to say a thing. He moved through it the way the host moves who does not want to be the host. And he talked to the children more than to the parents. And where he talked to a child, he talked about the problem the child was working and not about the school or the summer or himself. And the parents watched him do it and still could not fully decide about a young man who had built all of this and stood at the edge of it, eating nothing and selling nothing and asking for nothing they could see. Then they made the photograph. It was the parents' idea and not his, and it assembled itself. The families crowding onto the stage at the end of the old parish hall, 30-odd children and their mothers and fathers and a grandmother or two, packed in and rearranged and packed in again. Someone's cousin holding 3 phones to shoot on all of them. And when they called for the man to come into it, Bierce took one of the phones instead and shot the picture, so that the photograph the families would keep of the day the school began has all of them in it and not him. The whole striver congregation of the one had crowded and laughing on the stage, and the person who made the school standing where the camera was out of the frame, holding the phone. The pictures went up that afternoon and that evening because it was 2018, and these were digital families with digital children, and no one had told them not to. The mothers put them on Facebook, the long table and the bright gym, and my daughter starting a new school in September, the pride plane and public and tagged. The children put them on Instagram, the labs and the machines and the food, the way children post a thing to say this is mine now. The parent threads carried them across WhatsApp and WeChat and the Russian language groups, forwarded out past the 30-odd families to cousins and neighbors, and the families still back in the hall of some other contest. And the school that its founder kept off every record he could reach went public that July afternoon, entirely in the hands of the people it had taken, broadcast on their joy, while the man who built it posted nothing and stood in none of it. By evening, Fairview existed on the internet, and it existed there as 30 families' pride and not as one man's announcement, which was exactly the shape he had wanted and had not had to arrange, because he had built a thing people wanted to show, and people show what they are proud of, and he was nowhere in the frame. The first day came in the first week of September, and the 30 came to it as they had come to everything, ahead of their parents and already together, except that this time the parents did not come in. The parents brought them to the corner, and some of them to the door, and then let them go, because a school is a thing children go into without their mothers. And the mother stood on the Brooklyn sidewalk and watched the children they had fought the whole summer to enroll walk into the building without looking back, which is what you want and what empties you at the same time. Inside, the 30 were the whole school. There was no grade above them and no grade below, no seniors to show them how it was done, and no younger children to be shown. Nobody in the building who had ever been a student here, because no one ever had. They were the first, and the building was new to all of them equally, and there was no culture in the rooms yet, because a culture is a thing children make, and these children had not made it yet. They came in and found their places and looked around at each other. The league benches and the July gathering assembled now as a class. And for the first hour they were quiet in the way of people waiting to be told the rules, because every school any of them had ever been in had begun by telling them the rules. Fairview did not tell them the rules. Bierce did not stand at the front and lay down the law of the place, and no one else did either, and the thing the children kept waiting for did not arrive. What arrived instead was a problem. It was set in front of them as it had been on the Saturday, a real thing with no clean answer and no clock and no prize, and a man stood back and let them at it. And the first hour of the first day of the school was 30 children discovering that the school was going to be simply this. They were careful at first, because they were new to each other as a class, and because deferring was the habit of every one of them. 30 children raised in 30 houses to sit still and grind quietly and not argue with the adult at the front. So the first reaches were tentative. A boy offered something and looked up to see if he was allowed to have offered it. A girl half said a thing and stopped. And then it broke as it had on the Saturday, when one of them, the cab driver's boy, who had solved all four and placed nowhere and carried the anger of it into September, said flatly that someone's approach was wrong, and said why, and did not look to the adult to see if he was allowed. And the room waited a half-second on the old reflex, waiting for the adult to correct the rudeness of a child telling another child he was wrong. And the adult said nothing, and the seal broke, because that was the whole of it, and the 30 learned it in the first morning without being taught it. That the correction was permitted, that being wrong out loud was permitted, that the adult against the wall was not going to referee and not going to rescue and not going to rank, that the argument was not a thing that happened before the learning, but was the learning itself. Once the first child said the forbidden thing and the sky did not fall, the second one said it easier, and by noon the room was loud, 30 children going at a problem, and at each other, unafraid in a way that none of them had been at any school before because none of them had been allowed to be, and the deferring came off them in the first day like a coat too heavy for the room. Bierce stood against the wall and watched them do it. And what he watched was a thing that had never existed until that morning. 31st children inventing the manner of a place with nothing above them to copy, making the culture the later cohorts would inherit as if it had always been the air of the building. The next year's 30 would walk into a school that already argued and learn to argue from the children already there. These 30 had no one. They built the room's temperature out of nothing, out of the league benches and the broken doors in the summer and the permission, and it held, and every cohort that came after would breathe what these 30 made on the first day, and never know the room had ever been quiet. He said little and taught by the problem and left them to it, and the warm thing was in the room, in the 30 and their noise, not in the young man against the wall whose school it was, and no one looked over to see the look on his face while he watched the thing he had built begin to run. At the end of the day, the children went back out to the sidewalk where some of the parents had come to collect them, and the parents asked how was it, and the children could not really say because the thing that had happened to them that day did not have the shape of a school day and did not answer the question how was it. They said it was good. They said they wanted to go back tomorrow. The night shift mother's daughter, who had carried a perfect score home to a drawer in the spring, said almost nothing at all, and walked home beside her mother lit up in a way the mother had not seen since before April. And that was the whole of the report. And it was enough. The clinic. Ophelia Reyes came in with the boy's fever and got no further than the door. The camera above the desk read her face before she reached it, and by the time she had a word out the screen behind the counter held her whole. Her name, the shift she worked, the boy's grade, her husband's status, and her own. And the woman at the desk said only, "We have you, Mrs. Reyes," and waved her through. There was no form and no card and no talk of a bill. She was a Fairview mother, and a Fairview mother did not fill anything out at that door because the clinic already knew her, and it knew her not from any wire in her life, but from the one counter in the city where she had handed everything over on purpose, to be helped. So the place that asked her for no papers was the place that held her most completely, and both of those were the same fact, and she could not have told you, going through, whether the completeness was the mercy or the price. The fund was for the children. It paid for the fever and the stitches, and it paid for the cleft lip a family had carried unrepaired across 2 countries, so that a boy who had kept his hand down since he was small raised it again by the fall. It opened Rosa Herrera the night her appendix went and washed out the infection that would have killed her by the weekend, and it asked her nothing first, because a body coming apart is not a thing anyone stops to approve. A child who needed it got it, and the getting came before the accounting, always because the accounting was the machine's problem and not the child's. What the machine weighed, it weighed against the record. A second film that showed nothing the first had not was declined in half a second. A surgery that could wait went to a gate where a reason had to be shown before the knife. An emergency went through no gate at all, and because it held every number a patient had ever given it, it read each new one against them. so that when a boy's blood came back with a potassium that should have stopped his heart, it marked the result needs to check before the doctor had finished dialing, and the redraw came back ordinary. The first tube had carried another child's blood, mislabeled at the bench, and the machine had caught the label the bench had missed. It was right about the tube. It was right about the film that showed nothing. It was right about the drug a boy was handed that fought a prescription for March. And it was right the way a ledger is right completely and without kindness. And its rightness was a real thing and saved real children and was not the whole of medicine. Bob Ferrante had billed insurers for 30 years and never once been paid what he asked, or paid on time, or paid without a letter clawing part of it back. And he sent his claims to the fund and was paid in full the instant the record supported them. Inside a month, he ordered nothing he could not show a reason for, and did his best work, and was paid like a man who was trusted, which he had not been in 30 years, and which changed how he practiced more than any rule could have, because a man paid like he is trusted begins to work like a man who is trusted. That was the machine's other face, the one that fell on the doctor and not the patient, and it was as exact as the first and no warmer. The record was complete, and the record was not the patient. The machine was right about the tube and the film and the drug, and it was blind exactly where the record ran out, at the pain that leaves no mark on any scan, at the thing that is first of its kind and so reads as ordinary against the ordinary, at the trouble a patient has never had before, and the machine has no prior number for. There the ledger had nothing to weigh, and there a doctor still stood in the room, a person looking at a person, holding the one thing the record could not hold, which was the case the numbers had never seen. The machine caught what was written. The doctor was for what was not. And whether that doctor could overrule the machine, whether Ferrante, standing in the room with a child the record called ordinary and his own two eyes calling it something else, could reach past the screen and act on what only he could see, was a thing that had been decided and written down and told to no one. It was a setting at the center of the whole of it, one line in a place no doctor in the building could reach, and the man who had said it was the man who had built the clinic and the school and everything the families came through, and he had never said which way he said it. The families never knew the setting was there. Ferrante did not know if he was the last word in the room or only the second. The machine held every number, and the man held the one that said whether the machine could be told no, and that number was his, and he kept it, and the clinic ran every day over a question no one who worked in it was allowed to see the answer to. Ophelia Reyes took the boy home that night with the fever already breaking, and there was no bill in her hand, and no paper, and no debt she could name, and the money that had moved in a ledger she would never open, kept complete and kept from her, so that she was held entirely and shown nothing, cared for past any document, and accounted for in a book that was not hers to read. She was grateful, and she was right to be, because the boy was well, and it had cost her nothing she could see. What it had cost, and who held the accounting of it, and which way the one setting was turned that stood between her son and a doctor's own eyes. Those were not things a grateful mother going home in the dark had any way to know, and the not knowing was not hidden from her cruelly. It was simply the shape of the place. Everything given, nothing owed. The ramp. The next September came, and it was not like the first, because the first 30 students were still there. The new class arrived as the first had, brought to the corner and let go at the door. 30 more caught the same way at the same league the spring before, off the same flood, most of them off the board and a few for the top of it. But they walked into a building that already had a school in it. Above them now was a grade that had spent a year learning to argue, and the new 30 came in careful, deferring, waiting for the rules the first 30 had waited for. And the difference was that this time the room did not have to invent the answer, because the first 30 were standing in it. The culture transmitted sideways, kid to kid, which is faster and deeper than any way an adult can hand a thing down. The older children showed the younger ones how it went at Fairview, not by telling them, but by doing it in front of them, arguing being wrong out loud, correcting a teacher without looking for permission, and the new 30 watched the reflex they had carried their whole lives get contradicted by children their own age. And what a child sees another child do is what that child believes is possible for a child. The seal that had taken the first cohort a whole first day to break took the second cohort an afternoon, because they did not have to break it themselves. They had only to see it was already broken. And the second September solved what the first one never could, which was the family's fear. The year 2 parents had not taken a stranger's bet. They had heard it from the year 1 families in their own languages on their own threads across the same benches at the same league. My cousin's boy goes there. It is real. They gave him a doctor. He argues at dinner now, and I cannot stop him. So the 30 new families arrived, already half convinced by 30 old ones, and Fairview no longer had to overcome suspicion with a walkthrough and a witness email, because it had 30 living proofs walking around South Brooklyn. The school had a year behind it now. Suspicion was becoming reputation. The spring it closed. The second spring, all the doors across NYC were closed. It came from somewhere else, and then everywhere. And by a Friday, the city had shut, and Fairview shut with it. And the building that had filled with 60 children stood empty, except for the one person who lived in it. The founding cohort was in its second year when it happened, and the youngest 30 had been in the building only since September. And the school might have come apart there in the first weeks, the way new things come apart under the first hard weather. It did not. And the reason it did not was the thing the school had spent 2 years building without knowing it was building it for this. The children already knew each other. A school of strangers sent home to screens is a school dissolved. Fairview was not a school of strangers. The founding cohort had made a class of itself with no elders, and the second cohort had been folded into it kid to kid. So when the rooms went dark and the argument moved onto screens, the argument moved because it was the children's and not the building's, and it went where they went. The lessons went online, and it was almost all right, which no one had any reason to expect, and which was true anyway. The problem set can go on a screen. The argument can go on a screen once the children are already unafraid of each other. And these children were. They had done in a room for 2 years, and they did it now in a grid of faces, wrong out loud, and correcting each other and not deferring, the temperature holding across the distance because the temperature had never lived in the walls. The younger 30, 6 months in, kept arguing because the older ones kept arguing, the same transmission running down the same line, only now the line was a cable and not a room. The floor held 2, and it held by hand. The clinic did not close because a clinic that reads a family from the door can read one over a phone. And someone from the medical office worked it, remote or nearly one voice on the line, so that a family with a sick child in that spring did not have nowhere to call. There was a person to answer. That, in that spring, was not a small thing. It was the difference between a family alone with a fever in a shut city and a family with a number that picked up. One person from the staff lived in the building the whole of it and kept it, and the rest did the thing people did that spring who were trying to keep others alive without touching them. They brought food to the doors. They drove it out into the scattered blocks to the families who could not get it or could not get out, and they sat on the step and stood back and called the phone and waited to see the door open and the person come, and saw the person and saw that the person was upright and answering, and then went away. Food to the door, eyes on the person, a voice on the line, and away. The whole of the floor reduced to its irreducible parts and carried out into the city by hand, because the building could not gather the families anymore, and the families still had to be kept. Then, early the next year, the vaccines came. Fairview got them into every child and every family, all of them, the whole school and the households behind it, early and complete, as it got everything to those families through the one door without a fight before most of the city had sorted out how. And the doors opened again after that, by degrees, and the children came back to the building, and the argument came off the screens and back into the room, and the school picked up where the closed spring had interrupted it, 3 grades deep, and none of them lost. It was the proof, though the school never called it that. A thing a country refuses and a man performs lasts exactly as long as the man. And here was the man's thing put under the hardest weather a thing could get. And it had held the children close enough to keep arguing through a cable, the clinic close enough to answer a phone, the floor carried to the doors by hand, the vaccines through the one door. The school came out the far side of that spring intact. And a thing that comes out of a year like that intact does not get called a rumor again. The 3rd September. The 3rd September finished the shape. A third 30 came in at the bottom, and now the building held all 3 grades, eldest and middle and youngest, 90 children stacked as the school was built to stack them, and the youngest walked into a culture 2 years deep with models above them in both directions. Breathing on the first day, the temperature the first cohort had made from nothing, and never guessing the room had ever been quiet. From here the ramp was done. The school held at 3 grades and 30 a year, and it would not grow past it because 90 was the number one man could raise by hand. What the hierarchy was once all 3 grades were in it was not a hierarchy of deference. Seniority at Fairview was measured in arguments survived and not in age or grades. So the eldest set the room's temperature and the youngest rose into it, and a younger child could take an older child's approach apart if the approach was wrong, and did, and no one took it as out of order because the whole school ran on the one rule that the argument did not care who was senior. The eldest led by having argued longest, and the first 30 led all of them, permanently, because the first 30 were the ones who had done it with no one above them. The founders, the cohort that had built the air the rest of the school breathed. Then, at the end of the 3rd year, the first 30 reached the top and went up to the university, and the pipeline completed its first full arc. And that was the thing that changed Fairview from a promise into a fact. The families back in the blocks, and the families still sitting in the hall of some other contest, saw the first children go where the school had said 3 years before it would send them up into the university, built for it, on stipends, ready, and a school that has actually delivered its first cohort to the place it promised is no longer a rumor a wary family has to be talked into. It is a track record. The waiting list started that year and never stopped. And the best of that first 30 did not go far. Bierce kept some of them near him, the sharpest, the ones who had built the room from bare floor and then built themselves, a pool of them, the developers, the proof of the first bet, close to the man who had caught them off a board 3 years before, and now could not have said, if you asked him, that he had made them, because a mind that learns and opens sealed things and makes itself powerful is not a thing anyone makes. They had made themselves. He had only put a floor under it and stood out of the way, which was the whole of the school, and the pool was the evidence that the whole of the school was enough. By then the flywheel was turning on its own. The finding had been the hardest thing in the first year, Bierce at the judge's table reading a flood by hand. Now the school was the thing children heard about and came asking for, the reputation doing the work the witness email had done, the bait no longer something he had to lay, because the thing itself had become the lure, a school children wanted to get into, which is a school children walk toward, which is a clear soul summoning itself, which was all he had ever wanted from any of them. He still worked the league. He still read the reach and not the standing, still took the ones the standing threw back. But he did not have to write to them any more to make them come. They came. The offer. Adeyemi, the counselor of the Fairview Academy, brought the class to the Madame Sura Museum on a Wednesday, 30 children in 2 lines with their hands to themselves. And he had come for the 2 o'clock tour, because the school taught children to write code, and had come to buy, because a class learning to build the machine could learn twice as fast from a machine it was allowed to cut open. The docent met the class at the head of the stairs, 6 feet of it under a wig comb that morning, the egg of its head showing a face it kept for children, and it walked them from figure to figure, and named each one, and named its price, out loud and without shame, the companion in room 1, and what it cost financed over 3 years, the president in the gift shop, and in the consumer room, the educator, $29 a month, which read a child its bedtime story and marked every word the child stumbled on and sent the list to the company that sold the child its lessons. The educator was the unit built for a school, and it was the cheapest machine on the floor, and Adeyemi bought one, not to read to any child but to open. A body is destroyed in the reading of it, and a school with a budget buys the cheapest body that runs the engine it came to learn. The class would take it up to a lab, pin it back, and trace the guessing engine from the microphone to the marked list to the invoice, and the crate would leave the moment the paperwork cleared. The buyer, Paul Ray, watched the building the way other men watched weather, with no stake in it, because everything the museum systems put out crossed the screens before it reached anyone else. The door logs, the invoices, the loading dock manifests, the whole exhaust of a place that ran on machines he held the keys to. The class came through on a Wednesday, 30 entries at the door inside the same 2 minutes, and the log held them as it held everything, arrival to exit, and by the time the camera lost the last of them, the sale had already cleared, a unit off the consumer floor, the cheapest thing the building carried, boxed and papered and rolled onto the dock, one child leaving in a crate. The buyer was a school, and Paul read the line the way he read 100 lines a day. The name plain enough that a man lost it while he was reading it. A nonprofit, a lawful shell, no owner on the paper, and none behind it that the paper would show. Only a board and an address, and the clean arithmetic of an account that had already closed. He ran the name, and it came back a school for the children of poor families, most of them the children of immigrants, tested in at 14 and 15, and taught to build the best school in the city, by every account that named it, and free. Free was the word that held him. In a building where every figure on the floor wore a price, where the guide said aloud what a senator paid to own a president, a school had bought a machine the museum sold and taught its children to make the same machine, and the field where the tuition should have sat was empty, as the guide's own price was empty, a blank where a number belonged. Paul did not know whose school it was. The man was not on the paper, because the man was never on the paper. The boy had the whole of it in front of him, the buyer and the board and the crate and the cleared account, and the one fact that would have told him what he was looking at was the one fact built never to appear. He filed it, the way he filed everything. He did not drop it, the way he never dropped a blank field.
Into the hall, I sat down while you wrote. 4 hours by a door I could not open, and I did not know one thing you knew. Go on ahead of me, you did not look back from the door. I wanted that, I asked for that. I stood on the corner and I let you go. April came, a short message. I left it where it fell. I went back to the shift and said nothing, and you carried it home to a drawer. Tuesday came at 7 in the morning. I read it standing at the counter. not about you. I read that line 4 times alone. Go on ahead of me, go on ahead. You did not look back from the door. I wanted that, I asked for that. I stood on the corner and I let you go. The phone lay face up on the table. The key stayed in my hand. I did not decide a thing that morning. I left it lit where I would see it when I woke. A bright hall and a long table, and food that no one counted. And I stood along the wall with coffee and watched you eat like a woman at a wedding. Now you argue at my table, and I cannot stop you. You come home late and tell me I am wrong. Go up, go up, go where the man said, I will keep the light on in the kitchen. Go on ahead of me, go on ahead. You did not look back from the door. I wanted that, I asked for that. I stood on the corner and I let you go.